And I've had the good fortune, I started my career at Microsoft Research in what was one of the largest machine learning groups in the world at that time. Got to spin out their first machine learning-driven startup company in the early 2000s, which was traffic company Inrix. I've done 8 machine learning startups since then and had a consulting career that spanned working with over 40 different brands around the world, solving interesting problems with advanced data analytics, machine learning, and ultimately AI. And most recently, about the last 8 years, I've actually worked in bringing AI to marketing, firstly through a startup that I founded called Amplero, and more recently, driving customer analytics at Zillow Group. And my role at Zillow Group actually spans measurement, experimentation, optimization of every channel through which we touch the customer. Someone yesterday talked about 10 channels. We have all 10 channels that we're responsible for measuring and optimizing. And I work very closely with Tara Clark, particularly on our owned channel communications. So today my talk is kind of in 2 parts because there's something so important that I want you to take away from this that I really wanted to share this first piece of it, which is a really important lesson about AI. And as we think about business value, and particularly as marketers driving ROI, the most critical thing actually about this, I learned from my Nest thermostat and how poorly I drive my Audi and the cockerel on my farm growing up as a kid. So I wanted to share that with you. And then I wanted to tell you about what we're doing at Zillow Group, building what we're calling our customer experience machine. But it really puts together all the pieces that you need to drive a consistent consumer experience using AI. But there was an important question that came up yesterday, and so yesterday evening I wanted to help address it. I thought Blake addressed the question super well without any assets. But it's this, what is AI versus machine learning? And so I thought I would paint a little picture for you. So typically, when we think about machine learning, we combine these 3 things: sensing, thinking, and being able to act. And typically that is a static process except for the action. The sensing is we accumulate an important data set and important features and attributes that we were talking about yesterday that might affect what a customer will do or how we should interact with them. The sensing is the training of the machine learning model or the algorithm that can make a reasoned decision. And then the action is how we curate action on the signal that model generates. So that's typically the output of a machine learning process. When it becomes AI, is a very important subtlety. So, and I would draw the analogy between search, so search algorithms, when you post a search query, and the results you get back is a result of machine learning. Where AI comes in is when you're having a conversation. So think about if we have a conversation, you have to respond to what I say, you have to sense, you have to hear what I said, you have to think about how to respond, and then you're going to act. And then, based on the effect your interaction has on what I sense, think, and then act, you have to go round in a feedback loop. And so, truly AI-driven systems actually have this critical piece of there's a feedback, an important metric about the ongoing success of that interaction, which causes continual improvement or adaptation of the process. So when you think about machine learning versus AI, machine learning, you might be trying to train a model to develop a well-curated signal that you already know how to act on. When you're trying to use AI, you're trying to create an adaptive process that keeps getting better and better or can adapt to a continually changing environment. And the most important thing, if you take one thing away from our conversation this morning, the most important thing to get right about AI is driving what it takes to define the right success metric. And many people, I'm sure, and we have a panel conversation, roundtable conversation later today, I'm sure it will come up, oh, we've tried machine learning at our company, it doesn't work. Definitely works, but the impact can be completely unexpected. And the reason for that is that the impact is directly related to the success metrics that you're trying to optimize. And you have to have a situation where the customer experience and your business metrics align rather than compete. And I wanted to share a few examples of that with you. Who in the room has a Nest thermostat? Who uses the machine learning on the Nest thermostat, the auto-scheduling? I'm the machine learning scientist who switched off the machine learning on his nest. I'll tell you why, because I did have until a few weeks ago, a relatively old house with an original furnace, and actually to increase the temperature in the winter by 2 degrees takes about an hour and a half. And the nest spends the whole time turning the heating down. And so our house is never comfortable for our family. And in my other life, I actually race Porsches. This is me at Mazda Raceway, Laguna Seca. And the family says that I drive everything like it's the race car. And my wife won't let me drive our Audi for a similar reason, which is that the car is so busy optimizing for saving gas that I can't drive it smoothly. When I come to a stop, it switches to recharging the battery, and it has a jerk as I come to a halt, and then it turns the engine off. And then when I try and pull away at the lights, there's a delay, during which time I'm smoothly applying the gas pedal to the floor, and there's a very unfun jerk, and off we go. So I'm actually not allowed to drive our Audi. And then I grew up on a farm in the rural southwest of England, as you can probably tell from my accent. And we had chickens. And the rooster, the cockerel. Has anyone ever been attacked by a rooster? Yeah. It is a brutal experience. It's actually a terrifying experience. And this thing is pretty small. But it is relentless. Once it's decided that you're going down, it is relentless. And so when I think about, the popular myth about AI and the sort of fear about an intelligence, particularly in a sort of a warfare setting, the thing that's scary is that AI will relentlessly pursue whatever metric is you set up for it. And that typically is why, when you apply machine learning and AI approaches, it doesn't work. So AI, the reality is, AI will relentlessly pursue whatever metric it is you set for it, like the rooster, like the cockerel. So you must be careful what you wish for. So I wanted to give you a few examples from some of my work with various enterprises, and then talk about what we're doing at Zillow. One of those enterprises was a very large gaming platform company, and they had an email program and a benefit program behind it that incentivized their best customers to engage by providing them with free gaming titles to play every 2 weeks. They still do this. And their sense was that their primary metric was fandom, and this benefit was such a good one that it would drive significant fandom. And based on that fandom, there'd be long-term value to that. Well, sure enough, this is actually the 30-day average conversion impact by revenue segment of the customers. You actually see it had the highest conversion impact for the highest monthly revenue customers. And also significant impact for customers who had no current monthly average spend. This is mainly in downloadable content games. Which was great, except for the fact that this is the incremental revenue impact over that same 30-day period. So the segment of consumers for which the program was most popular, it was actually cannibalizing the most revenue from. So you had a problem because you were trying to drive fandom by driving adoption in this program, but in fact you were driving fandom with people who are already fans and high-value customers. And so the conclusion there is you really should be optimizing for revenue, not adoption, even though you have the program because you want to drive adoption. Another example, and this is very common in subscription businesses, including mobile. Well, I want to retain customers or reactivate them at all costs, and so I'll emphasize the richest possible retention offers, and I'll make it up on the back end because these consumers will have long tenure. Well, a number of different strategies were deployed, and you can see here the incremental 30-day retention benefit is largest for the reactivation campaign, which had a very rich incentive. So delightful, we'll drill down on that, right, because we like sort of silver bullet answers. Well, similarly, if you actually look at the campaign performance on 2 dimensions, the y-axis here is still the incremental reactivation or activation benefit. The x-axis is actually incremental revenue impact. You'll see that blue bar, the reactivation campaign, is actually the worst performing in terms of revenue, and you couldn't make it back up. And so, of course, what you really want to do here is emphasize retention, but with positive net revenue, in which case you'd probably use this education program here on the right-hand side. And then finally, and this is common when you're onboarding customers into your products and services, I've understood from my data science team that I want to get consumers to engage in a certain number of elements of my product, and that will drive long-term engagement and ultimately subscription renewal. So in this case, this is a very large productivity software business that you'll definitely have heard of. They had 5 key experience outcomes from their productivity bundle that they were trying to drive. And naturally, they had an onboarding email sequence in the first 60 days. In the first 60 days, they were trying to drive 5 different things. And so the question was, how should they sequence and choose between those 5 different things for different people? And so what we developed with them was a user health metric that actually combined whether or not a consumer had engaged on any one of those 5 experienced outcomes. And so you could actually look at that entire process holistically. What it did for them actually is took them from having one email onboarding journey, one possible email onboarding journey, to actually over 18,600 journeys. But its impact was about an 11% increase in retention and about $38 million in revenue per year. So a much more sophisticated metric was a key. And, of course, all this ability to drive combinatorics, but a very significant outcome. So just a few key takeaways from this section. 1, AI approaches work. The impact could be unexpected. I've given you a few examples. You really have to think about what is the success metric, because the metric you think you want to drive may have some inadvertent consequences. And that is usually, in my experience, the situation where people say, well, we tried machine learning, but it didn't work. The machine learning is relentlessly going after the metric that you set for it. It definitely works, but your metric might not be what you wanted to have. So you need to align those two things. The customer experience and your business metrics need to align. So how do you do it? And we've been talking a lot about this already this week. And at Zillow Group, with Tara, we're building out what we call our customer experience machine. And our customer experience today suffers from a real disconnection across different channels, and also a disconnection at Zillow Group across our different lines of business. And it results in an experience where consumers can be hit with very distinct calls to action, actually spanning very different buying or leasing segments and lifestyle stages. And there's a lot of wasteful purchase of paid media. And so the purpose and definition for our definition of a customer experience machine is that it's intended to make it possible for our organization to deliver delightfully personal and relevant customer experiences across all of our channels and for all of our personas. And why it matters, and I've spoken to many of you about this over the course of the last sort of 36 hours as we've talked, is that we're in the middle of a 3-year journey at Zillow Group where our business historically, we have about a $1.3 billion revenue business that's driven by leads and connecting consumers to agents. And our properties today, on a monthly basis, pretty much touch every person who pays for a home, whether they rent or own it in some way, every month. But among those consumers, only about 170 million or so a month, only 6 million will buy or sell a home in a year. Only 14 million will move, that's including renters and leases. And we're transitioning our business to be able to participate in that actual moving transaction. So we've launched a product called Zillow Offers. We participate in iBuying in various markets around the country. You can receive an offer from Zillow to actually buy your home from you to take the friction out of the moving process. Similarly, at the end of last year, we acquired a loan origination company. We relaunched it in April. It's called Zillow Home Loans. And we can help you with mortgage pre-approval, particularly around homes that we own through our Zillow Offers business. But of course, this brings about a major transition in how we nurture customers or need to nurture customers, because we're trying to drive them through the most complicated and painful parts of the home buying, selling, leasing, renting process. Whereas before, we were encouraging audience for browsing and giving all the hard work to the agents that we introduce those consumers to, not necessarily that well-qualified consumers either. So it's a very significant transition in how we manage customer experience. So how are we going about doing it? There are 4 foundations to this process. I want to check we're good for time. And I want to connect them to how I described AI earlier. So the first is having a rich user understanding informed by user identity, and what Lauren was talking about with Epsilon's platforms is sort of key to these sorts of things. Having a very rich view of the consumer that's both first party and third party. And that's about the sensing and also some of the thinking. I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. And then you need to have massively scalable experimentation, measurement, and the ability to optimize. And so this ability to optimize, the measurement is your feedback. To optimize, you need to do the thinking, reasoning with the feedback. And of course, because it's the most important thing for being successful with AI, as I just told you guys, you have to have the right metric. And in our setting, we're taking consumers, as it turns out, through about a 4 orders of magnitude increase in expected revenue through the course of the process with them. And so for us, it's kind of an expected value metric. And you have to be able to do this across the channels that consumers will engage with you on, and make sense for the part of the journey that they're in, where it's a very sort of tactical workflow through a mortgage pre-approval process or a home submission for an offer process, or whether it's about engagement and helping the shopping process through personalized social advertising and email advertising and so on, or whether it's about education that we might do through our own channels and using our rich database of content. So foundation 1, identity and user understanding, we sort of have a couple of layered notions to this. One, we understand consumers throughout their lifetime. Also, as Lauren was talking about, very human moments. People transition through the passage of their life, and typically in someone's life, they have 5 different moves, live in 5 different homes on average. And this is actually my passage through, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but our view of lifecycle segmentation. But then within any given lifecycle stage, you may or may not be in a moving cycle. And of course, among our 160, 170 million monthly visitors, we're trying to figure out who is in a move cycle, or who is just looking at their neighbor's home, or who is looking at interesting homes on the water, and all those sorts of things. It's a very interesting challenge. And as Steve mentioned, this process, at least for sell and buy, is about a 12 to 15-month process from the beginning of considering moving. And I've actually spoken to many of you already this week who said, oh, yeah, we're in the process of buying a home, and we're considering, I'm like, oh, did you know? It's probably going to be this long of a journey. And there's a little bit of surprise about this, but it turns out to be true. But it's about 12 to 15 months from consideration to close of a transaction. And through that process, you kind of go through, from our view, many different personas. And within those personas, you're trying to achieve particular different tasks. So you're currently a homeowner, you become a shopper, you become a buyer-seller, you're in an active process where you're trying to free yourself up from your current home, you're trying to engage and make an offer on a new home, and then again, if you're lucky, become an owner again. But of course, we don't really get to see any of that. We have to intuit all of this. And across all of our different brands and across all available data, we need to sort of have this converged, rich as possible view of the consumer, which means we have to have a fabric of identity. And from that identity fabric, we're able to stitch together our first, second, and third-party data sources and a very rich view of public data. So we actually know who owns every residential property in the country. And we know the history of the transactions and ownership and the prices and the mortgage background and so on. But we have to use that information very carefully because it's a highly regulated industry. But the idea is that we want to stitch together a temporal view, both of our consumers' consumption of our products and services, events that are happening outside that can be sensed about them, and then how they engage with our communications. And we can turn that into a temporal view, data-driven view of the user journey, from which we can do some of the first parts of the sensing and thinking, which allow us to infer all sorts of different elements of understanding about the customer. So foundation number 1, identity and user understanding is to give us this fabric against which we can orchestrate intelligent decisions and interactions, and at least intuit what the right thing is to do next for a customer. The question is, of course, how do you take the action? What is the right action to take? Well, it's very common for us to think about A/B testing. And really, when we're doing A/B testing, we're thinking about a relatively narrow set of experiences or a particular campaign and a particular action we're trying to get. And we have combinations of different ways to interact with the consumer that we're going to experiment to figure out which best drives the specific action. So think about click-through rate or open rate. In some sense, when we're driving click-through rate and open rate, we're really thinking about what is the quality of the content to engage the customer. And we need that, and at the same time, we want that engagement ultimately to drive the customer downstream in the process that we're trying to take them through the journey that they're on. And so you have to move from A/B testing within unique campaigns and experiences to actually be able to reason across available campaigns, across available ways to engage with the consumer, so you can decide for a given customer, with this suite of signals that are available, what is the right thing to do right now for that customer. Not just across experience, but understanding their behavior and their context. And to do that, you need a value framework. But this is sort of an overwhelming situation, and this is why you need machine learning capabilities, because if you think about the success of think about the success of a single email you might send to a customer. It is governed by a multitude of dimensions that sort of span this three-legged stool. There's your understanding of the customer and their profile. There's the behavior, how you've seen them behave and engage, the sensing you have offline as well. And then there's how you've configured the experience, what that email will look like, what the call to action will be, what the graphics are, what the tone of voice is, what the subject line is, all the semantics and the creative. And it's very easy to convince yourself there are tens, if not hundreds, of dimensions that might affect, for a particular person, whether that email will land or not land with them. And the problem is, if you were to A/B test 50 dimensions, there are actually 2 to the power of 50 A/B tests you need to do. And the length of the universe in seconds is about 2 to the power of 44. So you don't want to go about it this way. You have to have machine learning because it allows you to do the thinking part at very, very large scale. And you could reason with any one particular situation. Think about any one A/B test you want to do and its impact. But what you need to do is do this at massive scale. So this is about scaling up the thinking. The third part, the success metric. So we're transitioning in this transition from a business where a lead is worth tens of dollars to us to if we buy and sell someone's home and we attach a mortgage to it, it's worth about $6,000 to $7,000. But of course, it has another about 2 orders of magnitude decay rate down the funnel. So the value is super high, but getting through that process is hard. And of course, at the same time, we're still trying to drive audience and visits. So how do you connect these things together? And this is our ZG score, Zillow Group score framework. And it combines determining the journey that a customer is on, or the best, most likely journeys the customer is on, the likelihood that they will transact in that journey, and the likely value of that transaction. So when we think about connection with an agent, and we start from a consumer that might well be completely in the wilderness and doesn't visit a Zillow Group property. We're trying to take them all the way through submission of a lead to an agent, connection with that agent, and then a home transaction with that agent. And each of those different steps, from just visiting our site, becoming a registered user, all the way through making a request for a lead and introduction to an agent, there's a sequence of steps in value. So now think about layering in these different products. Each of them has their own journey associated with them and their own sort of big steps in value. Our home loans. So at any given time for every customer, we're able to evaluate, okay, given the behavior and engagement, given the journey we think that you're on, we think the next biggest step in expected value for you is this or that. So that's the framework of our ZG score. The final part of this is, of course, being able to orchestrate this across channels. And this is For us, is a mixture of build and buy. We have some interesting capabilities we've built to drive our paid channel communications, particularly that helps us honor some of the additional regulatory constraints in real estate, particularly the Fair Housing Act and how you can use certain elements of data to personalize and promote real estate. So our demand-side platform, how we bid and budget, and how we target our paid advertising, driven by technology that we have built. Our on-product experience is something we're sort of evaluating right now, which is how do you template your desktop and app-based products so that you can really dynamically play with the experience and very flexibly play with the experience, particularly as we're sort of proliferating journeys and calls to action. I'll show you a few examples in a moment. And then finally, our cross-channel campaign management, how we orchestrate our owned channel communications. And there we work with today with Iterable. And the key to this is sort of how we resolve exposure logic, what is the right channel, what are the right types of call to action over those channels, how much message is right, and so on. But the impact of this is massive. We think on an annualized basis, this is tens of millions of dollars of incremental revenue. Over the course of the transition we're on, which is about to 10x the size of our business, slightly more, to about a $20 billion in revenue business, the value of doing this is about $500 million, maybe $1 billion a year of revenue to us. This is a very significant and strategic activity. So what does that look like and where are we starting? So Tara and I have been working with our teams on how we leverage our depth of content and educational content in particular to take customers through the nurturing journey. Many of them will have saved searches on Zillow or Trulia, and we'll be getting updates on particular properties. But the key of this part for us is, okay, well, interleaved with these notifications about particular homes and where those homes are in the sales process and the pricing changes and so on, we're trying to understand, where's that consumer? Are they a first-time buyer? Are they currently a renter? Do they know how to make an offer? Can they reason with rent versus mortgage payments? And we're beginning to drive education at the right steps through that journey. And there are, you can bring into play all of the different attributes that you might want to A/B test or individually optimize into this process. So send time, subject line, how you curate the content, how much content you present for an individual, whether you include recommended homes in your home buying. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, recommendations, and how you differentiate between buyers and sellers and people who are actually selling and buying at the same time. And think about sort of onboarding in our application. So, it may be that we can promote Zillow Offers to you, that's selling your home. It may be that you need home recommendations because you're browsing and shopping or you're trying to find the right neighborhood, if you think about our Trulia property. It might be about understanding the value of your home and potentially how much equity you have in the home. And then, are you ready to make an offer and needing to be mortgage pre-approved? So there are all these different possible calls to action and different steps in the journey that consumer is on, and being able to present them and lead customers into those workflows at the right time is kind of critical. So a reminder, back to the very beginning. So AI, to do it well, you have to be able to sense, you have to have this rich understanding of consumer data. You have to be able to think. You need your algorithms people, all the tools that have the algorithms in that allow you to get the signals to drive action. Doing this truly with artificial intelligence means closing the loop and understanding what the feedback is into that process that can allow it to get better, that can refine your business performance, that can improve the quality of your customer base. So think about us with the ZG score. What we're trying to do is whether someone's a renter and we want to help drive them into an apartment that we engage with the landlord on, and we can help with the leasing, contracting process, and the payments process, or whether we're trying to sell a multi-million dollar home to someone and participate with an agent in that transaction, what we're trying to do with the ZG score is actually raise the tide of the overall value of the entire consumer base to us continuously. And how to do it, you have to have this rich understanding of the consumer, which needs a crisp cross-device, cross-brand user identity. You have to have this massively scalable measurement, experimentation, and the ability to optimize based upon that feedback. And you have, of course, as we talked about, to have the right metric and to be able to execute and operationalize that across all the channels through which you touch the customer. So it's a lot, but it can be done. Thank you.
Olly, that was great. Thank you so much. We have time for a couple of questions. He dazzled you. Here we go.
Okay, just tell us your name.
Hey, I'm Newt Bachter-Smith. I work for ADP. This was really awesome, but I think a lot of us are thinking, wow, this is a lot. If you have not, if you're not quite there yet, where do you start? Like, what is a good place to just get started?
You've got to be able to sense. If you can't sense, you can't do anything. You can't. So as marketers, we're actually very good at thinking about, given the right data, what might be good ways to interact with an individual. Think about how we strategize and develop campaigns today in single combination creatives. You can't operationalize those creatives to the right audience unless you have an understanding of that audience and some signals from it. You've got to get that right first. I would actually say at Zillow, we're a little bit guilty of perhaps having not done that. We've built the company by acquiring a lot of different brands and kept those cultures stable by not integrating them. And now we're actually paying the price for that, which is we're integrating them now so we can get this rich user understanding that we really need, particularly across renting versus buying. So think about hot pads and naked apartments properties that we own versus Trulia and Zillow Group. So combining identity so we have understanding there is key. So you don't have to be too ambitious with the AI, but if you have a data fabric, one, as marketers, you'll be massively enabled while the AI parts come, and two, the AI will really be able to work when you get there.
How much of this needs to be done internally?
It's really a mixture. We've sort of focused our own IP development on this decisioning capability because very few, well, they're really just a few of the biggest marketing clouds really trying to help you stitch together interactions across such a broad set of channels. That's why I broke that into sort of those three categories. There's sort of what you do in paid media with demand-side platform or data management platform. There's what you do on your products and apps with the personalization engine. Think of an Adobe Experience Manager or something like that. And then thirdly, cross-channel campaign management. Within each of those three groups, there are good solutions you can buy for structuring that. Now, some of the cross-channel campaign management capabilities, some of the people we've spoken to here and Iterable that we work with, are beginning to get from owned channel communication also to operationalization in paid media, which sort of brings my first and third buckets of channels together. Then the final thing is this challenge with product, and it means product engagement, and Veronica, I'm interested in your perspective on this later, is how you influence the flow of the product as marketing, because you really have to do that in a synergistic way to be successful.